I have never talked about it before, but I think it is time to share this with the world. It all started when I was about 10 years old. My family had just moved into a new house. It was a big, old house in a quiet neighborhood. We were all excited about our new home, but little did we know that we were in for a terrifying experience. One night, I was awakened by a noise. It sounded like someone was walking down the hallway. I sat up in bed and listened. The footsteps stopped outside my door. I held my breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The doorknob turned slowly. The door creaked open and a figure stood in the doorway. It was a tall, thin man with pale skin and long, dark hair. He was wearing a long black coat. I screamed and pulled the covers up over my head. I could hear the man laughing. He walked over to my bed and sat down. He reached out and touched my cheek. His hand was cold and clammy. "Don't be afraid," he said in a raspy voice. "I'm not going to hurt you." I pulled the covers even tighter around me. I didn't believe him. "I just want to talk," he said. "I want to tell you a story." I didn't say anything. I just stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Once upon a time," he began, "there was a little girl who lived in this house. She was a happy little girl, but one day, she saw something that she wasn't supposed to see. She saw something dark and evil. And after that day, she was never the same." The man leaned closer to me. I could smell his foul breath. "Do you want to know what she saw?" he whispered. I shook my head. "I'm going to tell you anyway," he said. "She saw the monster." The man's eyes widened and his face turned pale. He leaned back in his chair and laughed. "The monster is real," he said. "And it lives in this house." The man stood up and walked over to the door. He turned to look at me one last time. "Be careful, little girl," he said. "The monster is always watching." The man disappeared out the door and I was left alone in my room. I lay there in bed, terrified, for the rest of the night. The next morning, I told my parents what had happened. They didn't believe me. They thought I had just had a bad dream. But I knew what I had seen and heard. I knew that the man was real, and I knew that the monster was real too. I started to have nightmares every night. I would dream of the man and the monster chasing me through the house. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. One night, I had a dream that the monster was standing over my bed. It was tall and thin, with pale skin and long, dark hair. It had sharp teeth and claws. The monster reached out and touched my face. I screamed and woke up. I was sitting in bed, sweating and shaking. I looked around the room, but the monster wasn't there. I got out of bed and went to the window. I looked out at the dark backyard. I could see something moving in the shadows. It was the monster. It was standing there, staring at me. I screamed and ran back to bed. I pulled the covers up over my head and buried my face in my pillow. I could hear the monster moving around the room. It was getting closer. I closed my eyes and waited for the end. But the end never came. When I opened my eyes in the morning, the monster was gone. I never saw the man or the monster again. But I know that they were real. And I know that they are still out there, somewhere.